If it wasn't for the logo and all the Easter eggs, this probably wouldn't feel like Star Wars at all. And surprisingly enough, that is a good thing. Hi y'all, Snarky J Cosplay here. Episode 4 of Andor is officially out on Disney Plus today, and so far this series has the potential to be my favorite Star Wars series to date. Sorry, Mando. For the non-spoiler part of my review, I'm giving the 4th episode of Andor a solid 8 out of 10. There is, admittedly, little to no action in this episode. However, its pacing is definitely a little quicker and a lot more interesting than episodes 1 and 2, which I know a lot of people had problems with. Because of the intrigue building as early as episode 4, I'm definitely feeling way better about this series being something worth watching week to week instead of something more bingeable. Binge-worthy? Whatever it is. You guys know what I'm talking about. Because of the lack of Force drama, lightsaber battles, and firefights, this series so far has a really unique flavor to it where it feels more like a war story that just happens to be set in space rather than a specific Star Wars story. And that's a really good thing because Disney has made a mockery of recent Star Wars releases. I recognize that this style might not be thrilling to a lot of Star Wars fans. This is a 12-episode series that's definitely going to be more of a tantalizing slow burn instead of a merchandise vehicle set to destroy your old trilogy favorites, like the Book of Boba Fett, which I will never get over, so don't ask me to. This episode provides real tension, real drama, and a real interesting look into the politics that take place within the Star Wars universe. And it also gives us some really cool Easter eggs that I'm super stoked to tell y'all more about. That's all I can say without giving too much away. Like I said, this episode deserves a solid 8 out of 10 rating. Now let's get into it. From this point on, there will be spoilers for episode 4 of Andor. You've been warned. We open on Cassian and Luthen escaping in Luthen's ship, presumably in a rush as they've just escaped Ferrix. They're heading for a planet we've never heard mentioned in Star Wars before, called Aldani. While helping Cassian patch up the wound he got on his arm, Luthen presents him with two options. He can either drop him off somewhere to live his life on the run, or he can come with him and help with something important. Now, in true Star Wars fashion, Cassian, just like every other hero we've ever met, is super reluctant to actually help with anything that matters. He feels it's better for him to live his life and completely ignore the issues presented by the Empire because he supposedly fought on Mimban and already knows that fighting the Empire is pointless. Here's your first Easter egg. For those that don't know, Mimban was a swamp planet where during the Clone Wars in 22 BBY, the Mud Jumpers of the 224th Clone Division and the Clone Troopers of the 501st Legion fought a lengthy battle. Now, initially, the Republic promised the Mimbanese people their freedom after the battle was fought. However, when the Galactic Empire came to light and took over, everything they fought for went to waste, and essentially what was established was a regime that would be loyal to the Emperor and a stronghold for the Empire to gather resources from the swamp planet. For 12 years after this takeover, these swamp troopers ended up fighting their allies for pretty much nothing, which is probably why Cassian has a less than optimistic outlook when it comes to rebellions. However, the conversation takes a turn when Luthen reveals that he knows Cassian was actually on the ground in Mimban, working as a cook, and he essentially lived to tell the tale because he ran, which this entire exchange reminds me a lot of this moment from SpongeBob.
But I thought you said you were the head chef on the SS Gourmet.
Did I say that? No, I cleaned the bathrooms on the Gourmet. I was the head chef on the SS Diarrhea.
Despite turning the conversation on him, Luthen insists that he knows that Cassian is gonna die fighting the Empire one way or another. So why not go all out and really stick it to them? It's kind of a powerful line because we already know exactly what's gonna happen to Cassian. It does make the show fairly low stakes, but it also adds for some really interesting feelings that lines of dialogue like this will give you. He specifically tells Cassian that he came to Ferrix for him, not for that Starpath unit. Now, the exact job he's recruiting him for seems super lucrative. For just 5 days of work, if all goes well, Cassian will walk out with a whopping 200,000 credits. For 5 days of work, that's a lot of money. It's not a particularly simple gig though. He'll be working with a group to steal the quarterly payroll for the entire Imperial sector. Admittedly, this whole exchange between Cassian and Luthen feels very not Star Wars. Even the more positive positive lines of dialogue, don't have that plucky Rebel Alliance feel we're all used to when it comes to Star Wars. But that kind of energy is what drove me to feel that the Rebels were super boring and always pushed me in the direction of morally gray characters like Mandalorians and bounty hunters. So this different vibe we're getting is exactly what I want from this show. Rebellions aren't one with high fives and cheeky bumper stickers. They're one with desperation and people who aren't afraid to get their hands dirty. And that's exactly the kind of characters we're being introduced to in this series. We cut to a scene of the ISB, or Imperial Security Bureau, on Coruscant, where maintaining authority seems to be the topic of conversation. There's an Easter egg here. One of the officers mentioned that they've re-established authority and mining has resumed on a planet called Arvala 6. Arvala 7 is where Din Djarin met Grogu for the first time in The Mandalorian, so this is just a cheeky little reference to that show. The issue with the Pre-Mor authority on Ferrix comes up, but it's glossed over by everybody except for one Lieutenant Miro. Before we cut to the next scene, there's another Easter egg here mentioned by one of the other officers. The officer brings up an increase in construction shipments going out to a planet called Scarif. This is a reference to the Imperial facility that, in just 5 years' time, will hold the plans to the Death Star, and is also the place where Cassian Andor, Jyn Erso, and their friends will meet their untimely demise in the name of the rebellion. On the mountainous planet of Aldani, we see Luthen spot a woman walking up to his ship. He tells Cassian to pick a fake name to go by, and he goes with Clem, which I found kind of odd. I definitely would have picked like Shadow or Axel or Megatron, but that's just me. Luthen gives Cassian a Quati Signet as a down payment. This is another Easter egg, because Luthen explains that this crystal actually celebrates the uprising against the Rakatan invaders. This is a reference to the video game Knights of the Old Republic, in which the Rakata were an ancient race of warriors that actually dominated most of the galaxy for a really long period of time. Their reign was called the Infinite Empire, and this all took place long before the Skywalker saga ever happened. Now, Luthen steps out to meet this mysterious woman, whose name turns out to be Vel. Cassian waits behind on the ship, and I love that he just looks oh so tempted to hijack the ship and fly off. Can we really blame him? He's not entirely convinced, and the ship is like right there with the keys in the ignition and everything. It would be totally easier to just take off. Vel and Luthen now discuss Cassian/Clem's involvement in the mission. She's a little past upset because she's apparently been setting up this job for like 5 months. She doesn't like the idea of bringing someone else in, and she especially hates it even more because Luthen admits that he's paying Clem 200,000 credits just to take the job. Luthen won't hear it though. He tells her that she either takes his mercenary and they get the job done, or he pulls the plug on the gig entirely. Interestingly enough, he also tells her that Cassian is really disposable, which stuck out to me because he's been saying how special Cassian is like the entire time. I wonder if this is like one of those times that your parents tell you you're the most special one in your class, and really you're not. I have a lot of things to reevaluate. Back at Pre-Mor Authority headquarters, ISB Officer Belvin is chewing out 3 individuals, one of which is Deputy Inspector Karn, who should be called Deputy Inspector Karen, his superior, and the guy that was totally just encouraging him the entire time in episode 3. As a result of the incident that occurred on Ferrix, the entire Morlana system is now under permanent Imperial authority. We cut back to Aldani, where the situation between Luthen and Vel seems to get a little dicey. While Cassian, now going by Clem, is trying to question Vel a little more about Luthen, she cuts him off, says they're never gonna discuss him, and tells him not to even mention Luthen in front of the others. The true nature of the job is revealed here. They're gonna be robbing the Imperial armory of the Aldani garrison, with a team of just 7 people. It's not the first time in Star Wars we've seen a small group win, and so this entirely likely victory is maybe one of the reasons why Cassian had better feelings about their odds in Rogue One. After this, we get a scene of Lieutenant Miro and another officer discussing the situation that happened on Ferrix. Now, I think it's important to note that the final death toll here was 5, 4 Pre-Mor Authority officers and 1 local, which we know to be Tim, which is Vix Kalene's boyfriend. Now, the officers seem hell-bent on figuring out where the files that explain what happened to the Starpath unit ended up. Lieutenant Miro seems sure that the Starpath unit was stolen from a place called Steerguard, which we have yet to hear more about. Now, right after this, we cut into yet another scene of somebody getting into cosplay in Star Wars. Luthen is landing on Coruscant and he's putting on a wig, weird jewelry, and way more luxurious clothes than we've ever seen him in order to better fit in on Coruscant, which seems to show that he's got an alter ego in the city and makes me question what this guy is all about. Back on Aldani, Vel gives Cassian a little more background information into the planet. She mentions that the Aldani people live there for centuries, and yet in less than a decade, the Empire managed to drive all these people out of the mountain ranges and further south. She drops this gem that actually made me laugh a little bit, because she says that Aldani is close to nothing and very far from everything, which reminds me a little of...
Well, if there's a bright center to the universe, you're on the planet that it's farthest from.
And apparently this quality of the planet is why it's used by the Empire to store so much. Elsewhere on the planet, a sleeping lookout is woken by a comrade as they wait for Vel to walk up. Everyone is immediately suspicious of Clem as he's introduced as the newest member of the group. Now, it's here that we cut back to Morlana, where we see Deputy Inspector Karn, dragging his luggage, looking very defeated as he makes his way through some kind of galactic apartment building. He's dragging his feet the whole way to this apartment, and when he knocks, an older woman opens the door, slaps him, and starts crying. This is his mom, and you know she's not a Star Wars Hispanic, because if she had been, she would have hit him and then thrown a chancleta at him. I'm just saying, I know how it goes. I wouldn't have gotten tears and a hug. We cut back to Aldani, and while Cinta, a member of Vel's group, is fixing up Cassian/Clem's arm, Vel is basically being interrogated as to where the heck this guy came from. Vel basically shuts down any possible questions, insists that she trusts Clem, and the dynamic starts to become increasingly obvious as we can tell that she's really trying to maintain authority in this group. We cut to a scene of Mon Mothma, the current senator of Chandrila and the future leader of the Rebel Alliance, arriving on Coruscant to meet with one very well-dressed Luthen. His attitude and voice are immediately completely different. He seems to be the proprietor of some kind of gallery here on Coruscant. She claims to be looking for a gift for her husband, and yet in the gallery one trinket in particular stands out to me. There is a set of a Mandalorian breastplate and shoulder pauldrons in the exact style of Din Djarin's from The Mandalorian on a stand just behind them. It wouldn't surprise me if they pulled these from the set of The Mandalorian, and I honestly thought it was kind of cheap just because they're so exactly his armor style, and they're even painted to look like a brighter Beskar. Anyway, the conversation gets real as they head to the back. Luthen accuses Mon Mothma of not being able to deliver, and she admits that she's having way more trouble moving money around than she initially did, and that the senators are being spied on more and more every day. She claims she's found someone who can help, but Luthen is super reluctant to let anyone else into their circle. He kind of closes the conversation off, leads the way back out, and sends her off with a trinket for her husband. The shift in attitudes is played off so real that it was actually super cool to watch, because they're really getting into the nitty-gritty politics and spy stuff that takes place during a rebellion, which I think is fascinating. Back on Aldani, one more member of Vel's group arrives, and he's somehow even more pissed off about Clem being there than anybody else. His name is Lieutenant Gorn, and he's apparently their contact at the garrison. He seems pretty legit though, because he lets them know that there is an Imperial engineer coming from Coruscant, and he's actively working to get any movement down into the lowlands so that the rebels up here can do what they need to do. After this, we get some very Real Housewives tension between Mon Mothma and her husband back at home, which, by the way, that house should be the subject of like a Star Wars architectural digest video. That thing was gorgeous. Anyways, her husband is preparing for some kind of dinner where he's gonna be inviting the governor of Hana as well as 2 other government officials, which evidently Mon Mothma doesn't get along with. Her husband basically calls her boring, not fun, and sad, and he definitely doesn't really bend when it comes to who she does or doesn't want in their house. I'm sure a lot of people are gonna call this scene of marital drama boring. I, for one, think it's really cool because I like seeing the human aspects of these big issues like rebellions and wars and that kind of thing. Maybe I'm a gossip, I don't know, I just like watching it. Now, back on Aldani, the group discusses the mission. This garrison on Aldani is the depot for supplies, weapons, and the payroll for the entire Imperial sector. There's only a 40-man regiment established in this garrison though. Why? Because Aldani is super far removed, and the way that it's set up would make stealing from them a literal suicide mission. However, Vel and her friends are counting on this. They've set up the mission around a natural event where crystals in the atmosphere like randomly heat up and start exploding, which would provide cover and make it entirely possible for the group to escape in a Rono freighter, despite the fact that a freighter would be way slower than a TIE fighter. It's kind of like counting on fireworks to distract Lamborghini cops while you run away in a 1995 Honda Civic. Back in the ISB building, the pissing contest between ISB officers Belvin and Miro continues. He tells their superior that he won't relinquish any information to her because she's a ladder climber going above her station, and she insists that she should have access to this information because the Starpath unit was stolen presumably out of her jurisdiction, and she's sensing a pattern of potential rebel activity. However, she's completely shut down by her superior, and the tone here suggests that she has to work harder even though it's unfair, and that she's gotta be more tucked away and competent because of who she is. Mainly the fact that she's a woman in this position. I found this really interesting because it does give some insight into the gender dynamics of a woman that would be trying to achieve a position of officer in a room led by men. I found that this is highlighted in a political and interesting way rather than a forced man-hating kind of way like you would see in another Disney Plus series like, I don't know, She-Hulk. After this, we cut back to Cassian and the rest of the group on Aldani again. He's provided with the specs of a Rono freighter, a map of the garrison, and an Aldani phrase book to learn by the next morning. The episode ends here after we see Cassian definitely wondering what in Maker's name he signed up for. Like I said earlier, there is admittedly like no action to be drooled over here, and yet despite the lack of exploding starships and force drama, I am fascinated by this show. I remember back when Book of Boba Fett was coming out, everybody kept insisting it was a slow burn. I was saying by episodes 2 and 3 that I was bored and that it felt like a hot pile of garbage, and everyone said, no, wait, it's gonna get better. And I basically spent 7 episodes watching it get progressively worse until Mando showed up, and by the time it was over, I wanted to light all my Boba Fett merchandise on fire. But this is not that kind of slow burn. This is a dramatic series that's entertaining because of the fact that it's a slow burn, because they're not handing you everything you need to know right from the get-go. It's sure to build up into something absolutely spectacular, just like the entire rebellion spent years building up to eventually result in the explosion of a Death Star, which was awesome. Like I said, my rating for episode 4 is an 8 out of 10. And that's all from me. I've been Snarky J. Thank you so much for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and let me know your thoughts on episode 4 of Andor in the comments below.